So we're going to talk about Coppa in this section, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And first I'm going to give you a general summary of what Coppa is, who it affects, why it is a law and what its intents are. And then I'm going to give you an overview of the 6 steps needed in order to comply with Coppa. And then afterwards, in the next videos, we're going to talk in more depth about each of those 6 steps. So let's get started. Coppa is a federal privacy law that affects web developers, website designers, and app developers. Pretty much anyone involved with the design and strategy of creating a piece of software or a website or an app that collects user information, it may cover. And so since it's a federal privacy law, federal meaning that it affects every person in every single state, so it doesn't differ from state to state like a lot of other privacy laws. Coppa's goal is to ensure that parents are aware of how information is collected from their children who are under the age of 13 when they use the internet. And so Coppa, even though it does not necessarily apply to 14-year-olds or older, what ends up happening is because websites are available to everyone, and it's extremely difficult to limit who is actually using your website and what they're using it for when you give people the tools to fill out forms and to register for accounts, no matter who they are. It's really difficult to manage who is under 13 and who's over 13. So as a result, Coppa compliance often is necessary for pretty much any site that takes personal information. So Coppa does this. Coppa tries to ensure that parents know what their children are doing by requiring that websites and apps collect personal information. And personal information means all sorts of things, which we'll define later. But for now, think of it as names, addresses, photos, and videos from kids under 13. And if you take any of that personal information, it requires parental permission before that information is submitted. So you can't necessarily ask for forgiveness afterwards. You need that permission before the information is submitted. So this is a pretty difficult task. If I were to say you need to make sure that anyone under 13 has a chaperone, essentially, who tells them not to fill in a form on the website until they ask for permission, that's not necessarily realistic. So how websites and apps end up complying, because realistically kids don't get permission, is that the websites and apps pass the burden of non-compliance back onto the user and the parents. And they do this through the website's terms of use, community guidelines, and privacy policy, amongst other things. And so we're going to be talking a lot about how many sites play lots of mind games about telling any users under 13 in their terms of use that they can't actually use the website, even though everybody knows that people under 13 will use the website all the time in violation of the terms of use. And so we're playing this game that says we don't have any knowledge of someone. The website is saying that we don't have any knowledge of someone under 13 using our site because it's against the rules, when really everyone knows at the end of the day, practically, that 13-year-olds and under are using the site all the time. Coppa is enforced by the Federal Trade Commission. It is very selectively enforced, and oftentimes it seems like it's randomly enforced, and this is because Coppa enforcement is mostly based on consumer complaints to the FTC or some sort of industry that the FTC is targeting for investigation and decides to bring actions against. And so we'll talk a little bit more about enforcement, and at the end of the day, making sure that you're not a target for the FTC really just requires following certain best practices and not having lots of big public failures in your compliance with the intent of the law. So in this section, I'm going to now elaborate on the 6 steps that the FTC says you should take if you're building a website or an app that collects personal information. So what you should do is you should keep all of these 6 things in mind, and if you follow all 6 of these things that we're going to be talking about in more detail in other videos, you'll be in compliance with Coppa. So first things first, you should determine if your company or website is an online service that collects personal information from kids under 13. So as you'll see in the next video, each of these words has a definition. So online service is defined, collects is defined, what personal information is defined. Next, you should post a privacy policy that complies with Coppa. So, of course, your privacy policy is going to be doing a lot of other things, but one of the major workhorse reasons why you have a privacy policy in the first place is because of Coppa. Number 3, notify parents directly before collecting personal information from their kids. So you're not necessarily going to be sending out emails constantly to parents of children under 13 who browse your website. That is impractical and totally unrealistic. And so what does it mean in the real world to notify parents directly before collecting personal information and still be in compliance with the law? Get parents' verifiable consent before collecting information from their kids. So with that notification comes the parents' verifiable consent. And by verifiable consent, it means that you can prove that it was the parents who actually gave consent, amongst other things. So we'll be talking about in more detail what it looks like to actually have consent that is valid under Coppa. Finally, you have to honor parents' ongoing rights with respect to the information collected from their kids. In other words, your compliance with Coppa doesn't just stop at getting that permission and recording that verifiable consent. You need to make sure that the kids' data is reasonably safe, and parents have a right to take the data off of the system, etc. So we'll be talking a lot more about those ongoing requirements afterwards. And the other side of the same coin is implementing reasonable procedures to affect the security of kids' personal information. So once you have that information, and once you are respecting the rights about whether or not parents can take the information down or review what was actually submitted, you also need to keep this information safe from misappropriation or getting into the wrong hands, or theft for that matter, all of those things. So in the next videos, we'll talk about the 6 steps, and I'll see you there.